I said, you think these two mutts are going to protect you? I said, when this game's over, I'm going up to Linfield and burn your house down and shoot your horses.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Punch Drunk Podcast. I'm Paul Brooks, joined always by Michael.
How you doing?
Joey.
What's up?
And Mike Lane.
Howdy.
And joining us on the couch in studio is someone who has quite a successful professional hockey resume. Please welcome former NHL player, well-respected referee, and also a member of the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame, Mr. Paul Stewart. Stu, welcome.
It's great to be here at Brookside.
Great to have you. Stu, a tough kid out of Dorchester, Ivy League educated, University of Pennsylvania. Come out of Penn, you go to the Broom Dusters. And the one, I like to get into statistics. And one of those stats is they see 47 games played, but an ungodly 273 penalty minutes.
Yeah.
When you take that average, that is 6 penalty minutes a game, which means you fought in every game.
Just about. I think I thought I had 46 games, but I had 44 majors that year. And I was told about the first week after I had arrived from Penn on the bus. I bought my own bus ticket, $14, by Bob Kelly, the Flyers number 9. He said, pick the worst team in the worst league and ask them for a tryout. Because I wasn't playing much in college, and the university shut down due to the oil embargo in '75. And I knew that I would be free from December until April. And I contacted the Broom Dusters through 2 friends of mine, Steve Sterling, who played at BU, and another fellow, Richie Hart, who played for my dad at English High, played at Boston College, had played a little bit for the Bruins. And they attested to my ability to defend and protect. And I got off the bus, and I was introduced to the level of hockey that we've seen in Slapshot.
So weren't they part of not part of Slapshot, but they were like
yes, featured.
Featured.
The fellow who did the skating for Paul Newman was our captain, Roddy Bloomfield. He was the leading scorer in the league. And then 4 or 5 of us as well. Goldie Goldthorpe, the guy that they Ogie Oglethorped, he was on our team, and that's a story unto itself. My first week there, I was sitting on a stool at a place called Funsies. The guys were shooting pool. It was a Christmas party. And he walked up and sucker punched me. Let me know who was the toughest guy on the team. And he had just arrived, and the captain, Roddy Bloomfield, said to me, I was like, who the hell is this guy? And, he knocked me right off the bar stool. I wasn't expected to get slugged, but I gathered my thoughts, and he said to me, if you can't beat him, don't go outside. And I handed him my watch. I said, I'll be right back. And he went out and he started some martial arts moves, and I had taken 2-3 years of it with a fellow by the name of Matson. Matson's Academy of Karate in town, and I knew a few things myself. Plus, I grew up in a pretty tough neighborhood and wasn't shy. So I had that guy up over my head, and everybody was yelling for me to throw him out in traffic.
That's hilarious.
That's pro hockey. And then I going from the University of Pennsylvania not playing to Binghamton, and then the Rangers signed me at the end of that year due to Kurt Bennett hitting Dave Maloney with a 1-punch in Madison Square Garden, and John Ferguson, the GM, number 22, Montreal Canadiens, said after the game, I'm going to find myself some tough guys. And the first call he got the next day was me.
So you played also with, a lot of people don't realize this about the WH, the World Hockey, and then the NHL, and then there was eventually a merge at that point. But you played with the teams. You played with 3 out of the 6?
Yes. I went from Rangers. They weren't going to give me a shot at the National League. They had plans for me to go to New Haven or to Toledo. And they had farm teams, and they were going to ship me around, and I wasn't I mean, if I was going to wade through another league, I'd just go back to Binghamton.
Right.
And I went back to Binghamton, and Edmonton Oilers had a call out to find some tough guys. Bep Gwynlyn, who had been a Bruin, youngest player ever to play in the National Hockey League. I went there. Glenn Sather was on the team, Norm Ullman. I arrived with Teddy Scarf and Frank Beaton, and it was like a cattle call. Who's the toughest guy? And at that time, and a lot of people don't realize this, in 1975, 6, and 7, there were only 11 Americans playing in the National Hockey League.
Right.
And there weren't that many as well playing in the WHA. Minnesota Fighting Saints had a few, and Jack Carlson was one. And I knew that I was a minority guy. And it's funny to say that because I'm a white guy from Dorchester, and I grew up knowing who my father and mother were, and I had a pretty solid background. My dad was a high school teacher and coach, and my grandfather was a professional athlete, and we had a good upbringing. But I knew, and I was told actually my first week in Binghamton, if I was going to make it in pro hockey, I had to do it with my hands.
Yeah.
And that hockey at that time, with the Flyers winning Stanley Cups 74 and 75, with being the Broad Street Bullies, it seemed logical for me, and I, at the University of Pennsylvania, actually practiced with the Flyers because they practiced at our rink.
And that was the style.
And
it was really rough.
And I picked up a lot of stuff from Freddie Shero and Mike Nicolak and Barry Ashby and the guys on the team. Rick McLeish and I became very good friends, sad to say. And a number of those fellows have passed away now. But, Joe Watson and Jimmy Watson, Barry Ashby specifically took me out on the ice and showed me how to play defense. And I learned, even though I wasn't playing for the university, I skated every day. I drove the Zamboni and sharpened the skates at the rink. That was my work-study job because I didn't come from a big family with a lot of dough. So, I wasn't going to give up on my dream, which was to play in the National Hockey League. No matter who got in my way, I was going to wade through them.
And how many kids out of Dorchester would ever figure on, at that time, making the National Hockey League?
1959, I was 6 years old.
Yeah.
And I'm telling everybody I'm going to play in the National Hockey League. And to even be as far-fetched to say I'm going to play for the Red Sox, and there was no Patriot team.
Yeah.
So I of all the sports that I played, football, hockey, and baseball, hockey was the one that I had the least success, but it was the one that I had the most determination to achieve.
So did you also play with Mark Messier?
It's interesting. That year in 78, 79, which was the year before the expansion of the WHA teams, the Birmingham Bulls signed 6 underage players. Up till then, the NHL had a draft, but they didn't let players play if they weren't 18. And Birmingham signed Ramage and Five and a bunch of other fellows. Langway was a guy that came out of UNH. And Mark Messier from Edmonton, he showed up with Gretzky at Indianapolis. That team folded, and we signed Messier. I actually roomed with him.
Wow.
And he and I became very good friends, and over the course of time, and I played against Gretzky, and when I got inducted into the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame, I got 2 phone calls, and Gretzky was one of them, to congratulate me. And I always think, and I'm proud of this, that I earned what I set out for when I got on that bus to go to Binghamton. I achieved my goal, and I got the respect.
Yeah. Now, you are, I believe, still the only American-born person to have ever made the NHL, played in the NHL, and refereed in the NHL.
That's right.
Over 1,000 games reffed in the NHL.
1,010. 49 Stanley Cup games. I would have had more. The boss who took over after John McCauley died, Wes Mccauley's dad, who liked me and had hired me, he and Scotty Morrison. The next guy in, he was a poster child for a true Canadian, and he wasn't what I would say was user-friendly toward me.
Your son is named after him, right?
Mccauley John Stewart. And I tell you why. John Mccauley died in 1989, sadly, too early. He was about 44 years old. And what was interesting is that between playing and reffing, I try to hold different potpourri of jobs, trying to find a niche. I was a police officer. I sold cars. I worked in a radio station. I did a lot of different things, trying to find my way. And I was refereeing, and I was coaching high school hockey on Cape Cod, and I was refereeing. And the referees in the association down there had a meeting with me after one of the NIHOA meetings, and they said to me at Jake's over pizza and a beer, "You shouldn't be refereeing on Cape Cod." And I was like, I thought I was being, discharged, fired, insulted, or what. They said, "You're too good. You should go to the National Hockey League." So I tried to get into college hockey, and I got shunted aside. I wasn't the typical type of person that they were looking for. Mm-hmm. And they made that clear to me. They were Harvard guys. And the Harvard guys, they have that attitude that you've got to be a water bug and a great puck handler and all that stuff. And I played a totally different game.
Well, they also knew you went to Penn, so they didn't.
Yeah, that was another thing. But the fellow who was running the ECAC at the time, Brian Petrovic, I had played against, and his coach was Bill Cleary. Ironically, played for my grandfather in the 1957 U.S. national team. And they just had a distaste for the way I played the game. And that's too bad, because they never left the womb of the Charles River. And I made it, and I can honestly say I played on the line with Glenn Sather and Norm Ullman. I walked in to a room at the All-Star game in 2000 in Toronto, and Bobby Hull and Gordie Howe both got up and gave me a hug. And I just look at that. And when Gordie retired from Hartford and stepped out of hockey, they asked me to be the MC at his retirement dinner. So I achieved the respect that I hadn't gotten in other places. Yeah. And that's a personal satisfaction, but it's also a lesson for anyone that's listening that you can achieve whatever you choose to achieve if you have the persistence and the patience and the willingness to overcome your own obstacles. Your own obstacles might be that you might be a little too heavy, so you got to work on getting your weight down. If you don't have a quick enough right hand, if you're a fighter, you've got to move on that, and you've got to hitting golf balls or whatever it takes, constant and persistent effort. And the fact is that I would never quit, and that's been something they can put on my gravestone. I'd never quit.
So we're gonna get into a little bit more on your because you did have some battles you had to go with personally with your health, and we're gonna get into that as well. You had a long-standing officiating career, one of the most well-respected to ever be in the NHL. Before we go any further, I just want to make sure everybody understands that our today's podcast is sponsored by the Corrib Pub and Restaurant, 2030 Center Street in West Roxbury. Great atmosphere, fantastic food, excellent staff, and a perfect pour of Guinness. That's the Corrib Pub and
I know it well. I know it well. And I tell you why. My dad's team played at Billings Field right behind it. Yep. And when my mother passed, we had our was buried at St. Joseph's. Everybody wants to own land in West Roxbury. I've got 24 plots. But we went to the Corrib Pub for a post-funeral party, and the folks there were terrific, and I know Center Street so well, St. Teresa's Church.
That's what we have our post-funeral receptions there, too. The Blythe family is a very good family, but that's fantastic. So we're going to pass it around, let other people ask questions.
Why not?
I know we want to get into more of your officiating, and I got a few after that. But, Joe, you want to go?
Yeah, I'll ask a few questions. So,
that's my confirmation name, by the way. St. Joseph, patron saint of workers. If you notice when in the statue that he's holding Jesus, and in the other hand he's holding a carpenter's square. And as well, when someone asked where Jesus was, Joseph said he wasn't sure, but Jesus said, I'm being about my Father's business. And I chose Joseph as my confirmation name. He's also the patron saint of a happy death. I've had a good life.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that when I get to the gates, they don't say, stand over there.
Otherwise, you'll drop the gloves.
That's right.
So yeah, this question's kind of more the somber side, but I feel like I should get this out of the way. Like, so in 1998, you reffed the game between the Rangers and the Maple Leafs, but 3 days prior to that game, you got blood test results back pointing that you might have cancer. How were you mentally and physically during that game and games involving that when you were just unsure of what was going on with your health?
Well, it's in actuality even a little bit more serious than that, because it was February 22nd that my son was born, and on February 23rd, Dr. Kearney brought me in after I had all the tests and said that they had ruled out prostate cancer, but they felt that colon cancer was the reason why I was so anemic and I wasn't feeling well. And Katie Couric had just lost her husband, and they had done a special on the Today Show, and my wife slapped me and said, watch this. You have all those symptoms. So being who I am, and having gone through injuries and other different challenges, I went about my business. And I don't hit people over the head with my own faith, but my father told me a few days before we parted and he passed away. I was in Edmonton refereeing December 6th, 1987. He said to me, you have a lot of talent and you've got to take over, because I won't be here when you get back. And to get that type of responsibility means that people depend on you. And I had a wife and a baby and a family, plus my job, which I had fought hard to get, and I wasn't about to surrender. Mm-hmm. And I took 7 years of Latin. We talked about the University of Pennsylvania. I had 2 years there, which is a great school. Prior to that, I went to the finest secondary school in the world, Groton. And my roommate is a Rhodes Scholar and a congressman. And we were only 35 kids in my class. But I took 5 years of Latin there. And illegitimi non carborundum. It's what Caesar said to a general who was being besieged, and Caesar was on his way, and he was sending him a message of hope. Don't let the bastards get you down. And I think I don't like bullies, and I don't like quitting. And I would never, I always wonder if I had been in combat, would I have the guts to be able to face it? And I had to face those things. I went out on that ice that night in Toronto, and I had seen Gretzky that day walking on the street, and we bumped into each other, and a picture of my son was on. We made a little referee sweater for him, and he, of course, he was named after a famous Canadian, John Mccauley, and Gretzky congratulated me, and I said, so what are you doing here? They had just come back from Nagano, and he says, well, hey, we're playing tonight, Stu. I said, oh, I'm reffing. He goes, yeah, I figured that. And I was a little distracted, but I didn't tell him why. I never told anybody in the National Hockey League I was sick until August. I didn't have to tell anybody. It was my business. Mm-hmm. And you know what? I had the best doctors and the best team of physicians, people helping me and supporting me, that I just went about my business. And like Jesus did, I went about my father's business, my father and my grandfather's business. And the game must go on. And I went out there and did the job. And after that game, Gretzky had said he owned a restaurant in Toronto with the fellow that John Bitoff that owned the Raptors. We're going to have a big party over at my restaurant. Go on over after. I said, well, I can't really go there, Gretz. Me drinking with the Rangers? He goes, no, we're flying home. He said, but my parents will be there. You know them, and there'll be a lot of people you know. I walked in. There was a big banner over the back of the head table. Congratulations, Mccauley. And a magnum of champagne and a stick that Wayne Gretzky signed to my son.
Wow.
So if you think
that's pretty awesome
that I could ever quit or give in, excuses are for losers.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to flag. I wasn't going to fail. I was going to hang in there and show people what I had. And I'd like to think that Father Coyne, who may be the last guy to say anything about me, is going to say, love him, hate him, he was a tough guy with a big heart.
Yeah, speaking of how tough you are, you didn't like no ass kissing, and I read in your book that you got let go from NESN. Do you want to touch upon that and explain how that happened?
Well, I had retired as a referee in 2003, and I had several offers to do different things. The Bruins offered me a chance to become the director of their new charitable foundation, which I did. And along the way, the people at NESN asked me if I would be a color coordinator in the studio, similar to Dale Arnold and other different folks. And I said, sure. And I was doing pretty well. Montreal played the Bruins one night. Kerry Fraser was refereeing. And it's not the bond of blue like police necessarily, but you have to be objective when you watch hockey games. And I'm a purist when it comes to it. I'm antiseptic. I'm Clorox. I have no color. I don't care. I don't care who wins. I don't care who loses. I just want to see good players play and play well and do their thing. And there was a play at the start of the game where the player for Montreal gave a Bruin 4 or 5 tugs. The guy was on a breakaway, and he lost the puck. And it wasn't overt. And the Bruin player lost his chance to score, and the Montreal player got a penalty. But it wasn't a penalty shot. Or it was a penalty shot. I'm sorry. It was a penalty shot. And O'Connell, who was the GM at the time, who I had played against, and then I refereed, he kind of had a hair across his butt for me because of 3 things. A, I wasn't Canadian. B, I had been a referee. C, I was not a Bruin. And I heard that they wanted to have someone in the department of their charitable organization that was an ex-Bruin. They wanted it to be a Bruin, and they thought I was not the fit. So the old alumni said that they weren't going to go to any events that I was at or sponsoring. So that pretty well takes the charitable foundation out of, and they hated that I was on television. So I'm out. O'Connell called me up and laced me. He says, you could have been a Bruin. You could have. I said, the rule's the rule. I said, the guy lost the chance to shoot the puck. The Boston guy tugged him. What are we going to do? So that's, I see him now and I'm polite because I'm in the Hockey Hall of Fame. I'm not going to lower my standards of class and dignity just because he's a major league dink.
They didn't get their call, so you get bounced.
That's right.
That's ridiculous.
What words do you have to any people that are called homers, like Jack Edwards, for instance? How they're biased.
Jack Edwards knows I don't care for the way he calls a game is his style, and that's fine and good, dandy. But I knew Bob Wilson and I knew Fred Cusick, and I knew a lot of great announcers, and he's far from that. Because of the fact that, and lately he's tried to be a little better as far as like learning the rules, and he went to a training camp and so on and so forth. But you know what? Listen, I sat 2 seats away from him one night in the press box. I was a standby for the Stanley Cup playoffs. A game with Buffalo. It was the game that Adam Oates scored the goal and won the game, knocked the series. And Jack Edwards was literally debasing the officials from the press box, and I'm sitting 2 seats away. I finally get up and said to him, the next time you talk about a referee like this, I said, because there's a rule here. You don't talk about officiating in this press box. I said, I'm going to take you and flip you right over that edge. And I mean it. And when I say something, and if I tell you that's the way it is, I'll do it. And actually, Nate Greenberg had to be, hey, Stu, calm down. I said, this guy's an idiot. So he knows how I feel. Listen, their job is to report what happens, not to give it an opinion, especially based on lack of knowledge, the ignorance. They sell ignorance, and I don't like it.
Yeah.
How's that, Joe?
That's a good answer. I feel like you're not you're not the only one that thinks that.
There you go.
Across the NHL.
And good luck to him. He's got a wife and kids, and do your thing. But the fact of the matter is, I'm not going to be sitting here smooching his backside.
Another thing, when you were a player or as a ref, were there any places you went that had fan bases that were just like totally off the edge and just they were different from other fan bases that were just too wild or threw stuff on the ice? Were there any of those that happened?
I told Mike Ilitch, who was the owner of Detroit, who also owns Little Caesars Pizza, that was the best thing that ever happened to his pizza business. He said, "Why is that?" I said, "I skate out here. They throw 30, 40 of those pies right out on the ice." I said, "Got to be selling more pizza." And the fact of the matter is that, everybody has their whole personality. That the Felks in Detroit, and it was a big rink. Joe Louis. I skated in the Olympia prior. I've skated in 5 of the 6 original rinks in the NHL. The only one I didn't get to was the first Madison Square Garden at 48th and 8th. But I told Ilitch that, and one night in Toronto, the owner was sitting with a bunch of his directors right behind the penalty box, and in those days the glass wasn't too high, and one of them was catcalling me and giving me a hard time, and he was sitting next to this very attractive woman, and I looked at her and I pointed to her. I said, "Hey, you." She said, "Me?" I said, "Yeah, you." I said, "Is this the only way you can get a ticket to the game?" I said, "Next time I come, I'll get you a better seat. You don't have to sit and listen to that guy." and it was sort of funny because they all laughed. And when the game was over, their director's lounge was right next to the referee's room, and they all stopped in to shake hands and smile. And you can disarm people. I used to go to the New York Island, and I had a reputation of letting the players decide who won the game. I tried not to interfere, but I always had another aspect of how I officiated that I had in particular, because I had a unique experience before any of the other referees. I played at that high level. I knew all these guys, and I could tell what they were going to do a lot of times before they did it. And I could see the coach giving this little tap and sending the guy out and whatever. I said, and nothing, there was nobody ever put on a pair of skates I was afraid of. And so I could see this stuff. And I had this reputation of allowing the players to decide the outcome. And I got a lot of New York Ranger Islander games, and those were fierce rivalries. Calgary, Edmonton, Boston, Montreal. That's the level of this. And I came out of the rink, and this one guy used to wear this like a wig, it was silver, and he would really give me a hard time. And I said to him, after all that yelling at the game, I'm walking out of the rink with my bag. I'm going over to the hotel, which is only 100 yards away, Marriott, right there in Uniondale. I said to him, "You must be thirsty." He goes, "Why?" I said, "Come on with me. We'll go have a beer. You can yell at me all you want, and I'll buy." And you know what? After that, he became one of my biggest rooters, and always, when I had a kid, he brought me a present for my baby. And I told Ilitch, I'm the reason why the whole city of Detroit doesn't go nuts. Because all day long, those guys at the car factories, they take a nut and put it on a bolt all day long. And then they go home, and their wife yells at them, and the dog pisses on the lawn, and all this other stuff. And you know what? I give them the opportunity to vent, and it's no problem. I told someone from Atlanta when Ted Turner owned the team down there, I'm the best thing that ever happened to television. He says, "Why is that?" I said, "Because I bet you probably 20, 30 TV clickers go flying across the room. I know I make better Christians of everybody." And the guy's like, "Why is that?" I said, "Because I skate on the ice, they go, 'Jesus Christ, not him again.'"
Mike, you got it? What do you got?
What was like the best and worst facility that you were ever in?
As a player or as a referee?
Either or both.
A true dump.
It's interesting because
true dump.
Once you were on the ice, the rinks had different dimensions, and you'd go to Chicago Stadium, and it was a small rink, in Boston, Buffalo were small rinks, they were small. But in particular, as a referee, the LA Forum was the smallest dressing room that I was ever in, next to the Boston Garden. The Boston Garden at least had animal life, because you'd look down and there'd be a rat scurrying by you. But in LA, with the size of some of our linesmen, before the game, we would have to go out into the hallway and stretch, and there was a VIP lounge right nearby, and all of these Hollywood types, Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn and Jack Nicholson, and all these people would walk by, and we got to know them. And so that it was a terrible room, but the byproduct of it was that we had experiences. I met a raft of people that, really, you sit there and you say, wow. Yeah, and people have often asked me, who are the most famous people that you met? I said, how much time do you have? Going from when I was a kid caddying at Hyannisport, and Jackie Kennedy used to run the inside 5 holes and then stand at the top and have a smoke. And so that was a tough spot as far as it went on the ice. If you didn't referee the game that the people in Montreal wanted you to, or Quebec, then you heard about it. And it was funny because I speak French, because I played up there, and I went into Quebec one night, and they were throwing, it was the week after the toilet paper game when they threw all sorts of toilet paper on the ice in Quebec, and Fraser had refereed, and Wayne Bonney called a major penalty for elbowing on the blue line. I got knocked into the bench. The door opened, and I fell backwards, and I didn't see the play. And I reported the penalty, and the people started pelting the ice with all sorts of stuff. And I just told Washington, you go to the dressing room. Schoenfeld was coaching. I went and I told Bergeron, you go to the dressing room. Well, what you going to do? I said, we're stopping the game. You can't do that. I said, see those orange things? I can do whatever I want. Bettman can't stop me. I'm in charge here. And I went into my dressing room, and they had a TV there, and I'm watching the Montreal game, and they had captain's chairs, and you could put your feet up. And they had little sandwiches and soda and such. And I'm sitting there, and the owner of Quebec came down, the general manager, who I knew them because I played there. And Paul, what are you going to do? I said, we're going to wait. I said, the money's in the bank. These guys paid for their tickets. And there's 5 minutes left to go, and you get a major penalty. I said, so we're going to clear the building, and we'll finish the game without him. I said, because otherwise it's not safe to go out there. Because they were throwing loonies and toonies with like a silver dollar, that type of thing. You get hit in the eye, that's the end of that. So my concern was that, and I wasn't going to let them intimidate me. I said, or we can do this. You have your announcer announce that anybody throws anything more on the ice, they will be arrested and prosecuted. And say it in French because I speak French. I said, and I want 6 of the biggest cops to stand just above where I go on the ice. And when the announcement happens, I'm going to stand in the doorway. And the first guy or person that throws anything at me, I want the cops to go down on either side and yank them out and cuff them right there. And if you don't, I'm going to turn around and come back in here and wait for the building to be cleared. And we'll finish without them. And that's what happened. They got 6 big cops. Somebody threw a big soda, hit me in the back. And I just turned around and I saw the cops go down. They yanked this guy out of the seats, cuffed him, took him out. And I waved my finger to the crowd. And I pointed and I said, this is what you're going to get. And they all calmed down, and we finished the game. And you know what? People say to me all the time, oh, that couldn't have happened. Yes, it did. Anything I tell you that happened.
Yeah.
I'm incapable of embellishment and fabricating. It's just not me. And I'm going to tell you right now, now I go back to Quebec for the 50th reunion of the Quebec Major Pee Wee tournament, and they're introducing all the fellas from the NHL that had played in the tournament, and the last 3 are Paul Stewart, Messier Lamieux, and Mark Messier. So I'm standing in the runway underneath the stands with those 2 guys. So I said, so fellas, who do you think's going to get the biggest cheer? And Messier's looking at me, why? I said, well, you two guys are the cream of the crop in the NHL, but who's going to get the biggest cheer? And they said, Mess said, probably Mario. He's from here. And I said, nah, I will. And I'll bet you dinner tonight. After the game's over, we're going to go to Café de la Paix, the Cafe of the Peace. And they're both chuckling. And Lemieux says, really? You're going to get the biggest cheer? I said, yeah. So Messier is announced. He goes out, big cheer. Everybody, whoa, Messier. And now Lemieux, whoa, standing ovation for a minute and a half. Maintenant, tonight, now, the referee for tonight's game, a former Nordique, Paul Stewart. I go out, nothing. And I skate up through the players, get to center. I do a little Peggy Fleming stop with my foot. I'm looking back at Lemieux and Messier, and they're laughing, and they're like, we're gonna eat tonight on you and everything. And I went, un moment. And I unzipped my referee sweater and pulled it off, and underneath I had my Nordiques jersey, and I went like this. And the place went nuts, and I skated around, and the owner of the team and the president of the league, they were all cheering, and I went back and I said, so what kind of wine do you think we should have?
Dinner's on you guys.
Yeah. Not funny?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And then another question I had was, when you were reffing, who was the player that you always had to watch because they were just a dirty player?
Well, it's not so much that you had to watch them. It's just that, in order to maintain the safety of the players, that there were certain guys that played a little bit differently than others. And, the real tough guys, you didn't really have to worry about. Tony Twist, a guy like maybe Neely, or they're tough. They were tough guys. There no doubt about it. But you had to watch LaPerriere, who played for the Bruins for a while, and then he played for Detroit. And you had to watch the kid for Edmonton. I forget his name, but he was bad with the stick. And there were some certain guys, but I used to, they'd get out there like this, and I just tell them, I may miss one, but I won't miss the second. And occasionally, as I say, I remember one night Byers was standing there with a kid named Van Dorp, and Van Dorp kept pushing Byers. And we were on a TV timeout. So I skated over. You can see it on YouTube. I skate over, and I said, do you want to fight him? He says, yeah. I said, Lyndon, you want to fight him? He goes, yeah, I'll fight him. I said, okay, go ahead. Oh, we haven't dropped the puck. I looked at the linesman. I said, drop the puck. And we're still in the TV timeout. And Byers one-punched him and knocked him flat cold. And see, I often said, I refereed a game in Saskatoon in the juniors, and Shane Churla fought Wendell Clark, and I thought that was one of the best fights I ever saw. And, the best way to stop fights is to let them know that you're not going to stop them. And I used to tell them, you got a lot to say. Why don't you go to center ice and let's show us what you got? People were buying tickets. I want to see what you got. And I held apart two guys one night. I was kind of strong, and I held them apart. And they kept pushing. And I said, listen, I just came from the dentist. I got 8 new teeth. I said, and I'm not standing in the way of you two mutts. So you want to fight each other? Help yourself. and then I told the linesman, don't get in. And on that Churla fight with Wendell Clark, when that fight was over, the linesman wanted to get in, and I pulled them both back. I said, I'll take care of this. So I said, you guys ready for me? And they were tired, and it was a great fight. And I skated between them, and we were going to the box, and it was the Western Hockey League Memorial Cup playoffs. And we get halfway to the box, and I'm between these two guys. They're both big guys. And I raised their arms like champions, and the place went nuts. And the owner of Saskatoon, Bill Hunter, came down, and he said to me, he says, you're great for the game,
Awesome.
Showmanship.
Yeah, you got to have a little bit of that because it is a show.
Yeah.
I got resented a lot because I had natural enthusiasm, which is okay.
Yeah.
I'm in 5 Hall of Fames.
So you're the
counting?
one. You're the one laughing now.
Yeah, who's counting?
That so that leads us into a good topic I want to bring up. The night you fought Terry O'Reilly, Stan Jonathan, Al Secord, and Wayne Cashman
In one game.
in one game.
Yeah.
Now those are
Well,
those
one
are,
before the game and the others after
those are guys
or
that
during.
those are guys that a regular human wouldn't want to fight once in their life. You fought 4 of them in one game.
I would have fought more, but they
Elaborate on that story, please.
Well, it was November 22nd, 1979. People ask me all the time, how do you remember this stuff? And Bettman even asked me, he said, you know, a guy like you're signed up for the concussion suit. And I said, well, my pension's Canadian. Why wouldn't I try to get something?
Right.
And he said, but I've heard you speak. You're so articulate. You remember everything. He said, how can you in good conscience sign up for the concussion lawsuit? And I said to Gary Bettman, I put my hand on his shoulder. I said, well, thank you, Frank. And Bill Daly was standing there next to him, and he laughed, and I winked and walked away. But basically what it came down to was on November 22nd, a Thursday night, Thanksgiving, there was a call to arms by the Bruins to go after the captain of the Quebec Nordiques, Robbie Ftorek. And Robbie and I had played together 2 years in Cincinnati in the WHA, and 2 nights before that, on the Tuesday, on November 20th, in Quebec, they played back-to-back games. They played the Bruins, and Schmatz ran at Ftorek, and Ftorek cross-checked him in the mouth and knocked out a bunch of teeth and cut him badly. And, of course, now the Bruins are going to get Ftorek because he's coming into the Boston Garden. I was down in the minors playing in Cincinnati, not the WHA team, same name, but they had shifted Indianapolis, Birmingham, and we didn't make the NHL cut, the expansion. But on my contract, I picked up by Quebec. Jacques Demers was coach. He had been my coach in Cincinnati. And the call went out to me. I was actually training with Aaron Pryor and Mustafa Muhammad, Ali's brother. And in the gym there, Aaron Pryor was world champion. And I would go to practice and skate, and then I'd go up to the gym and work out, and I'd do 3-4 rounds with those guys. And, and I'd hit the bag, and because I knew somewhere along the way the call would come, and it came. The Wednesday morning, I was at Cincinnati's practice, and the coach called me off the ice and brought me into his office. He said, I don't know if you know what went on last night in Quebec. I said, no. And Quebec had my contract. And he said, well, Ftorek's going to get killed tomorrow night in Boston, and they want you, so you're going. And I jumped up so high, I put my hand through the panel of the roof. and I was happy. And I got on a flight to Boston, and I stayed at my parents' house that night. And the next morning, Thanksgiving morning, I called Fernie Flaman. I said, can I come in and skate with you guys? And I skated with Northeastern for about an hour. And I called the team together. I said, I'm going to play my first game in the NHL tonight, and I'm going to have 3 fights, and I'm going to pick them. And it's funny because a lot of the guys that were there remember that, and Fernie did, and Don McKinney, God rest his soul, both of them, great guys. And I was walking into the Garden. I actually went to the hospital the night before, Mass General. His kid, Christus Caldus, lived 2 doors away from me, and he was in trouble with cancer. He was 9. And I went to see him. I said to him, I'm going to play tomorrow night at Boston. You watch the game, and I'm going to wave to you. So I went to the Garden. I walked up the ramp, and Bobby Miller, who I played summer hockey with and I knew well, and he played at UNH, and I played against him at Penn. And he's like, Stu, what are you doing here? I said, never mind, Bobby. It's easy to figure out. I said, do me a favor. We're standing in front of the old Boston Garden Bruins dress room in the East Lobby. I said, go in and tell those guys that I'm here. And anybody wants a piece of Ftorek, they can come out now. We'll get it done right here. Before the crowd gets here, we'll do it right now. And I stood there, and Miller said, "You kidding me?" I said, "No, go ahead." I said, "And I'm not going after you." I said, "The guys that want to have a piece of Fedoruk, you tell them I'm right here." And O'Reilly and Cashman came to the door, and they opened the door, and they looked. I said, "Are you first? Who's first?" and they just laughed at me and shut the door. I went down and got dressed, and I went out for the warm-up, and we're skating clockwise, and the Bruins are skating counterclockwise. Cut right through the center of the ice in the B, and Cashman speared me right in the shoulder with the stick. And I turned and wheeled and went right into the Bruins end zone after him. And, of course, both teams converged. And Cashman and I turned the sticks over as I had learned in the minors how to stick fight. There's an art to it, and I had a couple guys that taught me well, and Larry Mavity was one, and another guy named Rick Pagnuti, and these were tough guys, and had made their living in the minors, and trust me, I knew what I was doing. And Cashman says, "I'm going to stick this right down your throat." I said, "What do you think I'm carrying, a salmon? Help yourself." So that ended up Jean Rattel for the Bruins, and I think Mark Tardif for Quebec calmed it down, and we just went about our business. And I went out, and we were playing, and O'Reilly in a face-off stuck his stick in the back of the knee of Wally Weir. Now, Wally had fought him 2 nights before. I knew everything that was going on. You got to be prepared for these things. And I stepped between Wally and O'Reilly. He says, "You fought him Tuesday. It's Thursday. It's my turn." So we dropped the gloves, and the linesman broke us up. So the referee, Dave Newell, gave us a minor penalties each for delay of the game. And I'm sitting in the box, and I said to O'Reilly, because in the old garden there was no glass between the penalty boxes, and in fact the Bruins players could climb right over the sidewall. Yeah. And I said, "Hey, you guys get any water over there?" And Cheevers, who was not playing that night, Jules Gilbert was the goalie, he squirts the water at me. So I looked at him and I said, "You live in Linfield, don't you?" And the two guys who were opening and shutting the door, their father was like Irish Mafia from Charlestown, 2 tough kids. And I said, "You think these 2 mutts are going to protect you?" I said, "When this game's over, I'm going up to Linfield and burn your house down and shoot your horses." And I'm from Dorchester, and it won't bother me a bit. So, and Chivas is like this. I said, "Yeah, I am." I came out of the box, and there was an icing. And O'Reilly and we fought. And Terry subsequently in years has said, how did we do? I said, "You put me on the map." I didn't look at who won, who lost. I was there. And we go to the back to the box, and then there's a picture in my book of Jonathan coming over. And I said, "Hey, Pocahontas, you're next." So much for politically correct. He's a member of the Six Nations.
Six Nations.
Yeah.
We know them well.
Yeah. So, and a tough guy. I don't have a problem with that. But he came over to challenge me. Before he did, Gary Doak, who was playing defense for the Bruins, came over and he put his stick up. He says, "We're going to kill you before you get out of here tonight." I said, "Hey, you." I got up and I sort of lurched at him. I said, "You go back to the bench. I'm only doing heavyweights." So Jonathan came over. I says, "You're next. I'll be out in 3 minutes." And we went out, and you can see the fight on YouTube, and it was a good fight. He started off, he had a cast on his hand. He cut me for like 2-3 stitches under my eye, and I recovered because, getting hit, we train for that, and we learn. And I learned something from Vinnie Marino about uppercuts, and I learned about getting the guy to drop his chin. Once he drops his chin, you control his face, you control his upper body. He can't see. And plus, I had about a 3 or 4 inch reach on Jonathan. So I got my hands inside of his, so he had to throw everything from the outside in. And all I did was I just rolled my wrists. And when I did, he couldn't hit me anywhere but on the upper arm. But I hit him with a right cross right at the end, and it staggered him. And I saw his eyes, and I just pulled him in. And I said, "Fight's over." And he says, "I cut you." I said, "A lot of guys have cut me, but you didn't beat me, so we'll have to do this again." And he got tossed. And then at the end of the game, they put me out at right wing with Fedoruk. And Secord, I didn't know who he was. I thought I was going to have to fight the other guy, for the Bruins, the tough kid. And he didn't show up, so Secord, he sort of jumped me a little bit. And we're wrestling around, and he's trying to do what he was trying to do. And so I said, to hell with this. I just took my thumb and stuck it right up his nose. And I gave it a twist. and the funny part is Dave Newell was the referee. And he had a part in my history later on in life. But the two linesmen, Jerry Gauthier and another guy from Edmonton, they were out there, and wouldn't you know, I end up working with all three. And in fact, my first game in the NHL, I went as an observer with my equipment down in the dressing room, Montreal at Boston. Dave Newell was the referee, and he got hurt, and they put me in. And so that is a little twist of fate there. But my night in Boston, and I tell this, put me on the map. Because I then went into Islanders and Philadelphia, and, you know, they knew if they wanted to intimidate the Quebec Nordiques, they had to go through me.
Yeah.
And that was fine. It didn't bother me. My contract for the next year called me to be paid by the Nordiques $70,000 US. And Kim Claxon and Jonathan, they were making 50 Canadian, which is half of what it's half of what I was making. And it's just, so Quebec released me. I had a chance. Magnuson from Chicago wanted to sign me, and Buffalo Sabres wanted to sign me. I went to Buffalo training camp, and when I got the contract, they were going to send me to Rochester, which was fine. Larry Playfield took his hand. He was their tough guy, and he banged it through a pinball machine and cut his hand. I would have been in Buffalo the whole year. And I was married to a woman who, after 7 years of going from city to city, said, I've had enough, and if you don't come home, we're done. So I went home, and ironically, then my life twisted, and I ended up from being a guy that needed referees to being one referee himself.
Well, some could say you were an enforcer your entire career. You enforced when you were on the ice as a player, get all those penalty minutes for fighting, enforcing everybody and protecting, but now you enforce it as a ref.
You're very polite, and I appreciate that.
Try to be.
But what it comes down to is that a lot of people say, oh, you were just a goon. No, I was a guy that knew my own skill level. I knew what tools I had in my toolbox, and I knew what it took. Plus, a lot of people don't realize this, and I keep saying this to folks. They didn't want me.
Yeah.
Because I was born in the Dorchester, St. Margaret's Hospital is well south of the St. Lawrence River. They didn't want me. They hated Americans. I played in Quebec with Fatorik. We're the only two Americans. He got hurt. I was the only American. I'm sitting in the dressing room in February watching the U.S. Olympic team. I stood up and said, see you guys, we know how to play the game too. And it's the same challenges that my grandfather had, refereeing in the NHL, 1928, the only American. And then he wins a Stanley Cup. Conn Smythe hated him. My grandfather should be in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Do you know what they said to him? They have one in the U.S. Go there. And that's just their attitude.
Yeah.
And if you look at, there's only one American official in the National Hockey League Hall of Fame in Toronto, and that's Bill Chadwick. And you know what? My grandmother was from Nova Scotia. I don't have any, and I love going to Canada, and I have lots of friends there. But what it comes down to is I'm also an American kid, and I'm not going to take a back seat to anybody, and that included the Russians. I faced down their leadership when I was running the KHL. They all, Putin, Medvedev, and all those, they were mad at me, and you know what?
How many years you spent in Russia? 2? 3.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting point, because here is a league dominated by the country that they have most of their teams in, and they brought me in because they recognized something that I could do, which was straighten it out and get it honest. And I had to really step into some team presidents and some general managers, because they were bribing the officials.
Were you ever concerned with your safety there? Like, did they have an eye on you, or
They had an eye on me.
Yeah.
No, I wasn't concerned because I had a pass, a little leather case, and said special advisor to the president. And I had a driver, I had a bodyguard, I had an interpreter, but I pretty well took what we call the T. I took the Moscow Metro, which is fantastic train system, and I would just, we were incognito and go. There were 5 teams in Moscow, and it was easier because the traffic was terrible to get to the rinks just by the local MBTA.
you speak Russian?
Da, chut.
You ever stop a game with 5 minutes to go?
I went in the dressing room and fired a guy
Oh God!
because they wore earpieces. And about 20 seconds after this play happened, he put his arm up. And I had looked up to the press box, and I had seen the general manager talking. And I knew that they had tapped into this guy's earpiece and told him, that's a hook. And he called a penalty. I went in the dressing room after. I said, so the guy, it was Dynamo, Moscow Dynamo. I backed that guy right up against the wall, that general manager.
Wow.
And I fired that referee.
Well, I just want to say we got one thing in common. You're not the only one sitting there who's fought someone from 6 Nations on the ice. So,
Is that right, huh?
oh yeah,
Well,
we'll show you that one after.
It's an interesting thing, and a lot of people
They
say,
like to fight.
yeah, but the fact is that in many senses, the various chores that people who want to succeed have to take on aren't necessarily the most pleasant things, but you do it because it's the way that you have the best avenue to get to where you want to go, to the level of success that you want to reach. And listen, don't kid yourself. If you look at the fighters that you're fighting and the fighters that are boxing and all, even in the football, in the National Football League, a lot of it is minority people looking for a way to get to the top. And just think about it. Think about guys like Joe Louis and Jackie Robinson and Willie O'Ree. I mean, they had tough roads to hoe to get there. And when you're not the mainstream wasp, then you got to fight. I went to Groton School, and I was a Catholic, and it was Episcopalian school. And trust me, bigotry and things like that don't happen overtly all the time. They happen subtly. Mm-hmm. And in the situation I was in Edmonton, I walk in and beaten and scarf or 2 guys. I ended up fighting both of them, and they didn't do as well with me. But they got chosen because they were from north of the border. And I can tell you right now, Frank Beaton's a tough guy, and I like him, and Teddy Scarf was a tough guy. I fought them both. And you know what? I got nothing but respect for them. But I can tell you, I was a better fighter than they were. I just didn't get the chance. I played 2 shifts in 2 games in Edmonton, and they sent me home.
So you're ending your career with Quebec as a player, and I remember you telling me this a long time ago, and I love the story. It's quick, but I love it. You get down to you didn't play the entire game. You get down to 10 seconds left or whatever. Jacques Demers was your coach.
Montreal, we're playing Montreal.
And tells you to get in the game or something like that.
Yeah, because back in those days, a lot of people understand about Alan Eagleson screwing Bobby Orr and Alan Eagleson with his shady dealings and sliding in with the ownership and things like that. There was a part of the NHL Players Association agreement, the union contract, that said that in order for a game to be played, to be counted for your pension, that you had to actually step on the ice. So I was in Quebec for a lot of games that I never saw the game. I never played.
Yeah.
And the fact is that you're playing, Montreal's playing Quebec. It's the last game of the regular season. We're out of the playoffs. And Nyland's sitting on the Montreal bench, West Roxbury kid, with my brother's roommate at Northeastern. And he and I are waving to each other. And I went by, and Claude Ruel, one-eyed coach at Montreal, I said, hey, Blinky, put Nyland in so we can get a shift. We'll put some excitement into this game. But, Lafleur's playing, and all of these guys are playing, and they're not going to put me in.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting on the end of the bench, and I go from one end of the bench to the other end of the bench to the other end of the bench. Now I'm sitting by the door, and I'm opening the door for the players. And Demers comes down. There's 6 seconds left. He says, "Cat," my nickname is Shah, vas-y, get out there. I said, "Geez, Jacques, I'd love to, but I don't have my skates on." I had taken them off. Because when the game was over, I was just going to walk into the dressing room.
Took your skates off. Oh, man. I love that. Now, officiating right now, currently, certainly Wes Mccauley is very well known. And it's really what you've alluded to. It's all about game management. How do you manage the game? How do you get along with, interact with the players? And you can hear, oftentimes you hear Wes Mccauley, the way he talks to players.
He played.
And he has tremendous control and command of the game. And he's well respected.
Shout out Wes Mccauley.
Do you think that they, or specifically Wes, has learned a lot from his dad and you, and the way that, you can become a really good official?
I think bloodlines have a lot to do with his success, no doubt, because when he was a little boy, his father was an on-ice referee.
Yeah.
And then growing up, even to the point in 1989 when his father passed away, he had just signed a college 4-year agreement to go to Michigan State. And the fact is that he roomed with some good players that played in the National League. He was certainly around it, playing in the minors. He got drafted, I think, by Detroit and last pick. But so what? He had the pedigree. But the other thing is that he went through every phase of the lower levels to get to where they are. The one issue now, and I'm sort of, I guess, kind of the problem, when they saw that ex-players made pretty good referees, even begrudgingly giving me any respect, they decided that was the way that they were going to take the footprint moving forward. And so now they've looked for guys that have only played in the minors or played in majority. 10% of the officiating staff of 100 is American. 90% are Canadian. And it might be even greater. What might be 92%, which means that they don't have a lot of guys. And it's the reason being is that the department is based in Toronto and it's all Canadian guys.
Controlled by the Canadians.
Yeah, and and that's colon Campbell. I told people in '98 I had colon cancer, and then after that I had colon Campbell. And so you just look at, their attitude. And I just think that we've got a couple kids. Ryan Daisy's one I used to have working for me, and he used to come to my skating schools, and he's a linesman, very, very solid guy. And there, Rooney from South Boston, he's a good kid. I worked with him early on, so you've got, and he was a kid that didn't play anywhere. So he's done it because he's talented.
And he's got like 1,500 games himself.
Yeah,
now.
But he's been in for 20 years.
Yeah.
So
and speaking of Rooney, so everybody likes to always, make their comments about him when he refs the Bruins or whatever. And the opponents always say, well, it's going to be one-sided tonight. Well, oftentimes I always feel is that Rooney goes out of his way not to give the Bruins a call. So.
Well, I disavow any of that theory at all. I'm skating by the bench one night. Pat Burns yells at me, "You screw us just to prove you're fair." And I blew the whistle. I stopped the game. I leaned in and I said, "What did you say?"
Yeah.
He said, "You screw the Bruins just to prove you're fair." I turned, I said to him, "That's so illogical." I said, we got going back and forth, screaming at each other. And I had really no reason to stop the game except for that. Boston was playing it was 0-0 game. It was against Ottawa. I hadn't called any penalties. There was a little roughing play that happened well behind the play and Axelsson was the kid, Swedish kid. And, he was one of those fleet guys that skated around and was a water bug and did all that antagonizing stuff. And somebody mushed him in the face a little bit. So what?
Yeah.
You know, that's part of the game in my mind. You know, if my philosophy for penalties was if it happened to me and I'd be pissed off, that's a penalty. If it happened to my teammate and I'd want to jump the boards, that's a penalty. And if my teammate did it to another guy on the other team and I put my hand over my eyes and said, you know, what the hell did he do that for? That's a penalty. It's a pretty simple recipe for calling penalties. So I said to Burns, you know, we got going, and then Axelson said, I said, listen, pal, when I want to talk to you, I'll talk to the peanut gallery. Bork came over to me. He says, I hope you're not going to hold this against us. I've never seen a coach and a referee get into it. I turned and I said, I don't want to hear about this tonight. Post-game interview, I don't want to read about it in the paper. It's between him and me.
Yeah.
And that's it. And you know what? It's because of the way that Bork was. He controlled the room. And he was a great captain and a great hockey player and a great guy, really good guy, and I like him a lot. And I just think that, you know, he went in. I go in after the game. I'm taking my skates off. I'm watching the interview on TV, and Burns is asked, "What happened between you and Stewart in the second period?" You know, Burns stood up. He said, "I think Paul Stewart's one of the best referees in the National Hockey League. I don't think he had his best period tonight." You know, I can take that.
Yeah.
The next night in Buffalo, and I had told Bork this, if I read about this or hear it, you won't get a power play. Boston played Buffalo. I was reffing. I went by the bench. I said to Burnsy, "Hey, I see your wife got another beautiful tie for you tonight." You know, and he just looked at me, you know, and I refereed the first game played in the rink that they dedicated to him in Quebec. That's named after him, Pat Burns Arena. It's in Stansted, Quebec, just over the border from Newport and Derby. And friction's part of the game.
Yeah.
But you can get past that because the ultimate aspect for every one of us is to be a pro. And, you know, give the people what they're paying for, which is the game. Give them the game. And that's why I don't really care who won or lost. And when I tell people about officials and they spout that ignorant statement that, oh, he's from Boston. I was running college hockey, and I had Jean-Yves Roy played at UMaine, played for Sean Walsh. I had him at St. Lawrence opening night. Maine's playing St. Lawrence, and the St. Lawrence coach called me, "How can you put him in? He's a Maine graduate." I turned and I said, and he's the Boston Bruin, and he's a great referee. And the guy that had him in UMaine has been dead for 10 years, and I'm not too worried about it. I said, and I'll tell you what, when the game's over, you can call me and tell me how badly I decided to put him in, how bad it was. The guy called me the next day and said, "I guess you were right." I said, "I don't think you have to guess." I said, "I know what I'm doing." I said, when a referee steps into the dressing room, takes off his street clothes and puts on that uniform, he's Switzerland.
Yeah.
My grandfather refereed in the National Hockey League and stopped for 2 years and became the general manager and coach of the Chicago Blackhawks and won a Stanley Cup. And the owner fired him. The owner had 18 years of ownership. He had 18 different coaches. My grandfather the next year went back to refereeing. How do you think he was when he went into Chicago?
Yeah.
Do you think he might have been a little nervous? Yeah, but he was a pro. And he looked at the game the way it's meant to be looked at, the way I was taught and raised by my father. I'm in the batter's box playing in the Park League, and my dad's umpiring the plate, and he banged me on 3 strikes, inside fastballs. Boom, boom, boom. And I get in the car, and I'm driving him home, and I said, "I thought they were a little tight." He goes, "You're the number 4 hitter. Swing the bat."
You go up there for a reason.
I go to Brooks the Wednesday after the Beanpot in February 1971. Giles Threadgold and my father are refereeing the game. The Brooks coach found out after the game that was my dad, and he said in front of everybody, "How could you referee? Your son's playing." My father stood up and said, "He got the 1 goal and 2 assists on his own, but I gave him the 5 minor penalties. So I think you're way off base. And besides, Giles and I worked the Beanpot Monday night. We're the best college officials working a prep school game at 2:30 on a Wednesday. We're off because it's spring, February vacation."
Right.
End of story. So that's the way I was raised. And that's why when people bring up, provincialism and any feeling of leaning towards someone. Listen, Fedoruk and Ronnie Wilson, I played with those guys. I gave 4 bench minors in 20 years in the national hockey, in pro hockey. 3 of them, 1 to Fedoruk and 2 to Wilson. The other one I gave to was Brian Murray. He had a lisp. He kept saying, Paul, puck was in. I kept getting spit on. I banged him.
Hey, what do you think on a little bit of a touchy subject? What do you think about women breaking in to the NHL? Do you think that will happen? And if you do, is it going to be soon? I'm
the greatest proponent of that.
Is it Katie?
Katie Gay.
Katie?
Yeah, she played at Brown.
Her.
Yeah, so
Fantastic.
she worked for me in the ECAC, and she's absolutely one of the most athletic and silky smooth skating athletes that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And I said to a few people, and I know I never had the support because deep down inside, there are people that have that bigotry about it. It's just ridiculous. I said, she was the first woman to work a Division I college game, Sacred Heart at Union. And the people that I answered to were all like, if you look down under their feet when the game started, there were small puddles under their feet because they were all like nervous. And one person said to me, I hope this works out. I said, she's no different than anybody else that I put out there.
Yeah.
I said, because I know my job and I know what I'm supposed to do and I know what a referee looks like. And I'm going to tell you right now, whether they stand up or sit down to go to the bathroom is immaterial to me. I said, what matters is when they put the whistle to their lips and put their hand in the air. Is it a penalty? That's all I care about. And I think athleticism and intelligence and an appreciation for the game, if you have the experience. She played at Brown. She was the captain of the team, and she led the Ivy League in penalties. How could I not love her? And the fact is, she's easily one of the best backward skaters I have ever seen. And I have pushed her, and she and Kelly Cook went out to St. Louis in the All-Star game and worked the 3-on-3. And they proved that they can keep up with them. And, a lot of people would say, they're going to get run over. I see guys get run over all the time.
Absolutely.
And, the funny part is, I think that's one of the deficiencies of officiating now, that everyone in the National Hockey League is sitting there relying upon batteries, wires, and a television camera. They don't go to the net, and they don't skate into the fray, and that's where you have to be.
Yeah.
And you have to be close to the net, and I learned that in my very first game, 30 seconds on the ice after Newell got his ribs broken, and I got sent out there, second period, Montreal-Boston, for second place in the Adams division, and Courtnall scores a goal. Puck fell between his Waz's legs. I blew the whistle. I couldn't see the puck, and I was in perfect position. Guess what? Another 2 strides and a little bit behind the goal line, I would have seen it. And Mccauley said to me, "You didn't quit. You didn't fail on me," and I appreciate that. And you know what? I learned something, and I tell people this all the time. Conn Smythe said in Toronto one night, if you can't beat them in the alley, you'll never beat them on the rink. And if the games are to be won and lost, they're won and lost in the corners. That's true for players. But for the referee, they'll forget a hook and a hold at center ice if you let it go. No problem, because the puck's gone. But they'll never forget the goal at the net that you missed.
Yep.
So get to the net, because for the referee, that's where the money is.
Did you watch Game 6 the other night?
I did. I watched every game.
So let me ask you. So NESN may have gotten rid of you, but we have not. And I want your opinion. Under Rule 79.1, hand pass, the definition. And there was a lot of talk about DeBrusque's, the puck going off his hand as he was reaching for his stick. Bergeron skating in to get the puck. It wasn't a pass. It wasn't a movement. But Rule 79, a player shall be permitted to stop or bat a puck in the air with his open hand or push it along the ice with his hand, and play shall not be stopped unless, in the opinion of the referee, he has directed the puck to a teammate.
Intently.
So So there was, to me, and I don't know about anybody else, but I think a lot of people looked at that and said, "There's no intent to do anything with that puck other than to grab his stick."
He's picking up a stick.
Yeah,
And it was
well,
rough. What is your
all
opinion
of
of
this is it's similar to the whole question of when a player does something violently against another guy. What was his intent?
Yeah.
And you can't read intent. But in the situation that referee was in, because he was in perfect position,
Yep.
and he allowed the play to continue, I was one of the reasons why that rule was magnified. I was in a game one night in Montreal, and Peter Swoboda at the point, Czech defenseman, knocked the puck straight down. He caught the puck and dropped it at his feet. And while he's looking for the puck, Carbonneau skated by him and took the puck and took off. And now the puck gets in the net. And they said that was a hand pass. I said he didn't pass it. He knocked it down.
Right.
He deflected it. And in the situation, there has to be in everyone's mind, what is the purpose of the rule? Always go back to that. John Mccauley taught me that first thing, because we had a game where we had the new shootout rule, right? And the 5 players that they chose for the shootout couldn't shoot if they had penalty time on the clock. So I was in a game one night, and Wendell Young, goal scorer, is on the shootout list, and the other team sent a guy out and grabbed him, and they fought. So now we go to overtime. He's not playing. We go past overtime. We go to the shootout. He's on the list. So he comes out of the dressing room and sits on the bench. And the coach of the other team said to me, he can't shoot. He has a penalty. I said, yeah, but it's not on the clock. The literal interpretation was penalty time on the clock.
So am I hearing you that you weren't a fan of that call the other night?
No, I'm not a fan of the call, and I'll tell you why. Because of the fact that
There's no intent.
There was no overt act
Right.
to give the player on his team an advantage.
I mean, Bergeron went in and skated and took the puck.
It's the same play that I had in
you just
Montreal with
mentioned.
Swoboda and Carbonneau.
Right.
And the fact is that the player who was down wasn't even looking at the puck. He didn't know where the puck was.
Yeah.
And we've had plenty of goals scored in the National Hockey League. I had one, Winnipeg and Vancouver in the Stanley Cup playoffs, where the player got fouled in overtime, and I had my arm up for a trip.
Yeah.
And as the player fell, the puck hit his back foot and went in the net. And everybody said he kicked it in. I said he had no control over himself. I allowed the goal. It knocked Winnipeg out of the playoffs. And you know what? I had the jam to stand up and make the call because that's what they pay me for. And I'm going to tell you, this is the problem right now with the National Hockey League and any other league. We waste all the electricity in the building and all the fan stuff because the guy 75 feet away on a blue line lifted his foot 2 inches off the ice.
Yeah.
And I think that, micromanagement is all well and good, when you're talking about nuclear secrets and things like that. But this is a hockey game played by humans, coached by humans, and officiated by humans, but more importantly, observed by humans. There was no aspect of anything illegal by that play. He didn't do anything overtly to cause his team to gain an advantage. And to me, that's the measuring stick.
Yeah. Not that it would change the game because they were playing like shit the whole night, but I mean they did score. It never should have been taken away. And I think of people who did not talk about it were a little leery of the rule interpretation. And they didn't talk about it after that. But now they're starting. I just saw an article that they talked about how controversial it was.
I tell my officials all the time, don't rely upon replay because you're always wondering whether the D batteries are failing. So you're counting on a replay, and a lot of times, and I refereed a lot of games with replay, and the original intent of the rule of putting replay in was to decide if the puck went in the net or not.
Yeah.
This goes back to a game in 1980. A lot of people don't know. You got to know the history of your game to appreciate how the rules came about and all of the things that happened. But in 1980, there was an offside play at the Island in Philadelphia, and the Philadelphia Flyers lost. The play was offside by 3 feet. Now, I can see that
Yeah.
as being,
Blatant.
and we have it in baseball. So I can see those aspects, but now we're into a situation where micromanagement, any play in overtime now, they challenge because it could be offside.
Yeah.
So it's now become a political hot potato, and it just doesn't necessarily jive with the real intent of what the game's supposed to be. It's supposed to be spontaneous action. And I'll tell you another thing Mccauley told me once when I was a referee. You want to keep the game debris free? I said, okay, I'm listening. He said, when the puck stops, that's when the BS starts. Keep the puck moving.
Right. Right.
So, John Mccauley should be in the Hockey Hall of Fame, not only because of his acumen, but because of his lifetime dedication to the game. And I consider him of the men in my life one of the top 3 guys. And regarding officiating, my grandfather, my father, and John Mccauley, they taught me my skill.
Well, Stu, it's time to wrap it up. And with the way we wrap it up is we'll give a little shout out, go around the table. But first of all, I want to thank you for joining us today.
Did we cover everything?
I think so.
Okay,
Covered
because
it. We covered everything.
I come to Attleboro or North Attleboro, if not to see my pal Ricky Cavallero over at Custom Crafted, but definitely to go to the Bliss Dairy.
There you go.
Because my friends not only own that property, but as well, they have one of the best little restaurants. Unbelievable. And the ice cream is fantastic. And working for Tecta America, the biggest roofing company in the U.S., I do all their roofs.
Well, shout out to the Bliss Dairy and shout out to Tecta America, too.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for coming in. Michael.
Thank you. Obviously, that was great. You really gave a lot of good insight. Like, we talk about hockey all the time, but you don't get that from anyone else but you, so appreciate that. And you got to give a shout out to the Bruins tonight. They need this one. So,
well, it's interesting. I have to say, I do root for individuals, and I'm not a fan of any particular team. My team's gone. Yeah. They're in Colorado now. They're the Nordiques. Mm-hmm. But I can say this to you, that I look at McAvoy and Bergeron, and I look at some of the fellas on that team, and I know them, but I don't. They're not intimate buddy with me. But Bergeron I've known for a long time, and I just think he's a class guy, and I think that he deserves the opportunity to win the Stanley Cup on his way out.
Yeah.
One more.
Absolutely. Yep. Mike Lane, what do you got? Anything?
Just thanks for coming in. This is great.
Yeah.
Joey.
I have to say, if you want a good read, go check this out. You Want to Go by Paul Stewart. Great book.
Go.
And my pal Terry O'Reilly wrote the foreword. And as well, my children's book, which none of the profit goes to me or my co-writer or the illustrator. All of the profit goes to inner city youth hockey to buy skates for kids that couldn't afford it. Look at what skates did for me.
Where can they get that book?
This is all on Amazon.
Amazon, okay.
And I have another book coming that I'm in the midst of writing, and my editor asked me, well, what are you going to call this one? I said, well, You Want to Go? He goes, you've already done that. Again?
Nice.
Yeah, also, Punch Drunk Podcast. When we're at 100 subs on YouTube. So, definitely, if you're watching this, go subscribe. And if you have the lame excuse of saying, I don't have a Google account, make one. It probably takes out 30 seconds to do that. So, subscribe. I'm calling
you and
I.
You and I are from different generations. Yeah. You know, I knew Captain Kangaroo well.
Folks, subscribe, hit the like button, and also if you want to email out to us now, we have our Punch Drunk Podcast 27 at gmail.com. Reach out to us there, Punch Drunk Podcast 27 at gmail.com. Stu, I can't thank you enough for coming in here.
Well,
Thanks
you're my friend, and you know,
it's awesome.
And this is a guy who not only has been a friend of mine for a long time, but as well is considered and been recognized as one of the best amateur baseball umpires in the United States. He won the Bill Stewart Award.
Yes.
And I just am so pleased to be with a fellow official. It's not an easy role in life, but I'll tell you what, for all of you players or anyone that's ever thought that they know a lot about something, come on down. We can use officials in every sport.
Absolutely. Folks, that's going to do it for us. We're going to join you next week, but for now, ciao.
Later.
Peace.
See ya.
Mommy, can I have my M&M? Mommy, can I have my M&M?